There's an unnatural number of butterflies and bees around me as I sit here in a shady spot in an overgrown area of a garden. At least it looks overgrown to most. And I just had to share this experience with you. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead, and I'm in a garden site here where I have just got done with a comma cutting grass along a berm at the base of a terrace. Now in the lower area of the terrace is wildflowers, beautiful pinks and red and yellow. And this grass, it's a little overgrown, and there's some alfalfa growing in it as well. But the butterflies are going from flower to flower and spreading their wings of color and just filling up this space. Now there are beehives nearby, so the bees seem like a lot, but again, we're close to the hive. But this is a natural space. I would film it, but my camera is a little overheated. It is very hot outside, but where I'm sitting, I can feel a cool breeze come across the area and through the shade under the small trees. Now there's some small persimmon trees here. There is some honey locust trees, and I'm sitting on a crudely made bench that's here in kind of a overgrown space. But of course, I use my comma, kind of a garden sickle, and I cleared out the space around where I'm sitting, so I'm almost in like this little oasis. The grass and wildflowers are about waist high, and there's actually even corn behind me. And if you imagine this space, you develop and feel you're like in a womb of nature. You're in this quiet place. Now, of course, I can hear the fan from a greenhouse up the hill, but I also hear the birds chirping. I also hear the wind blowing through the grass, and I feel the wind blowing through the grass. These are the experiences that we want to bring to you through Prosperity Homestead. I actually see some small butterflies down here. Now, to some, this might look like an overgrown space, probably better described than seen, because it is a variety of grasses. Some of the wildflowers are expired, but there are some sunflowers right around the corner. There's even a red sunflower. I have not seen that before. It's kind of a reddish yellow sunflower. But my point being is that most people don't know what nature looks like. Sure, they think environmental needs are outside and you know, somebody should be capturing carbon from the atmosphere, and it's a great idea, but they won't allow their yard to grow out longer or develop an herb garden or a wildflower meadow. They'll instead still add chemical fertilizers to their lawns and spray herbicides and pesticides rather than creating an environment where pests do not exist. Now, there are small birds in the area that I'm at, and these butterflies are abundant. And yes, there are times here and there when a bird will fly through and snag one of these butterflies. If I'm quiet enough, the butterflies do seem unnatural because they're so close and they're so nearby. It's almost like something you would visit at an arboretum or you'd visit at a butterfly garden, something that is unusual for humans to experience in real life. Except there are ways of managing your land, your gardens, your homestead that will allow you to have this natural abundance, that will allow you to have nature right outside your doorstep in a beneficial and cooperative way. See, these butterflies and these bees are pollinating these flowers, but they're also pollinating the vegetables as well. And that's why within what seems to be an overgrown area that I almost have to machete through to get from one side to another, there are melons, eggplants, pumpkins, green peppers. Some of the corn is ready, not all the corn's ready. Beans, basil. Basically, you go in thinking there's nothing there, but you come out with nature's abundance. You come out with food security. You see young trees and plants coming up, and maybe they don't look like much right now, but in a year or so, they're laden with fruit. There's actually apple trees right around the corner that are just exploding with fruit. We checked the fig tree earlier today, and it's got small figs on it, lots of them. Oh, I just saw some pigeons. See, it's like nature's abundance right here, but to many, this looks like a failure. This looks like an overgrown mess. This looks like wildlife. And it is wildlife. It's butterflies, birds, pigeon, all kinds of birds. I just saw pigeons. There's a hawk that comes through here too. honeybees. There's like 2 or 3 different kinds of honeybees. Some of the kind that we have in the hives over here, and some of them that just, they bumble around. It's a beautiful space, but can you see past the abundance? Can you see past the growth? What is overgrown for one person is actually biomass to feed the soil, mulch to protect the soil enzymes. It's layers of food forest to deliver different kinds of abundance over the seasons. And yes, I'm literally looking at like 8 to 10 butterflies, not arm distance, they're not that close to me, but they're right out here in front of this panoramic view of wildflowers and small trees and some tall grass and the tops of some corn that didn't quite grow as well as we'd want it to, but still they are abundant. And these are actually white, black, and kind of a tan, very beautiful. It's another one that's kind of a yellowish color with black tips. I'm sorry, I don't know what kind of butterfly these are. I have not seen them in the city. I don't see them around the area, but it is something that you would expect to see in a wildlife habitat, in a preservation site, in a museum. But you can have this at your home. So let me share a little bit about how this site is set up since you can't see it. This is an audio podcast. We do have a video channel on YouTube. You can search for Prosperity Homestead there or search for my name, Justin Hitt. But this particular site is actually on a slope and it has been terraced out. So a terrace is a level area that has a little bump or a berm on the end, and then it steps down to another level area. So what I was doing is actually cutting the grass on the berms and sweeping that down into the lower area and using it as mulch on the back path, which is also called a channel on a terrace. Now this gives me a clear idea where these bumps are in case I come in later with the flail mower. But again, I'm also surveying the area because below of where I'm at has black-eyed Susans, it has echinacea, and probably 15 or 20 other plants growing in it. And then upslope, it looks like we have corn and potatoes, and a little bit of overgrown nitrogen-fixing hairy vetch and clover. Now, there's some other stuff in there too, but ultimately what I'm doing is I'm tracing out the bottom edge of the terrace, standing in the lower terrace and cleaning out what is called a vegetative strip on these terraces. Now, you might be saying, well, Justin, you're describing a space that is overgrown and you're cutting out the areas that are supposed to be vegetated. Well, yes, these areas that are supposed to be vegetated, we cut them out because they're their access points to get to the garden so that we can come in and harvest the vegetables from the beds that are quite overgrown. But as we harvest the vegetables from the beds, we're using hand tools to cut, chop, and drop this mulch. It's a living mulch on the soil so that now we're feeding the soil as we're harvesting our vegetables. And then these terraces start to grow out what is preferred, which is a grass. We really would prefer to have a consistent texture for our mulch, which is grass. And so that grows on the vegetative strip. Now, grass is shorthand for clover, hairy vetch, and probably more of a cereal grain than a grass you might have in a yard. But of course, it is mulch that feeds the soil. So we clear the vegetative strip with a hand tool so that it can regrow new and fresh biomass. We clear around the plants in the beds themselves, laying all of this chopped material down around the plants, which is basically mulching in place. We have soil biology that comes up, earthworms that come up, that compost those materials in place. So we're not hauling materials. We're not carrying things in and out of the garden. We're really using a scythe or a comma to just work through as we go those spaces that we want to traverse. And so the channel on a terrace is a good place to traverse. And then the berm, you can actually walk on the berm as well. But ultimately, we are making these paths through the garden rows. Then we go through and harvest the abundance that's in here. And trust me, we don't find everything. Oh, I have to pause for a second. There is a black butterfly with beautiful looking white eyes, very small white eyes on the back. And then it has a blue tinge around its tail, and I forgot what those little things are that hang down. It is just amazing, and it is the size of my hand. It is beautiful, Beautiful butterfly. So let me get back to what I was talking about. So these paths give you access to the vegetables. You don't end up finding all the vegetables. It is very true. But it also means that the rabbits, and we don't have any deer in this enclosure, but we do have rabbits, and we do have birds, and we do have other things that come in here, but they don't tend to eat all the vegetables because the vegetables are difficult to find. But again, we know where they were planted, so we go in, cut around them. Oh, 2 bluebirds just flew through here right in front of my face. That's just incredible. And we harvest out these vegetables. Now, we're growing in such an abundance that the birds, the butterflies, the bees, there's some snakes out here. Yes, they're in the tall grass, there's snakes. There are rabbits, and there might be a hedgehog here and there, or a groundhog. But the thing of it is they do not get the vegetables. They do not eat the vegetables because, again, they eat other things. Did you know groundhogs, they love clover? So if they've got plenty of clover to eat, they're not going to eat your vegetables. They're busy eating the stuff they like the most. But again, I come through, I chop and drop, I lay the cut grass, hairy veg, miscellaneous plants. I lay them in the bed at the edges where I'm walking. So now I'm not disturbing the soil. It gives me a nice little mat to walk on. And I'm around the vegetables. Well, let's say it's an eggplant. I'm chopping the brush around there and laying it down around there so I have mulch that retains moisture and helps that plant grow. And as it breaks down biologically, it is feeding the soil. Now you might be saying, well, Justin, what about slugs? Do you have slugs? Yes, there are probably slugs in here somewhere. But again, the space has so much abundance that it's not a big deal. Now, what's interesting about the vegetative strips on the base of the terraces or on the slopes of the bumps that are defining each terrace is that once those are cleared out, you can introduce chickens or ducks or other animals temporarily into your garden space, and around the mature plants, they will actually go in and get all your grasshoppers and bugs. And some people say, well, there are mosquitoes out there. Well, no, again, we have the birds eat them. We've set up these predatory pairs so that we have a natural and balanced ecosystem. But if you wanted to feed your chickens, you can actually select one of these beds. Each bed or terrace is about 8 feet wide. So a bed might only be 3 feet wide, but a terrace could be 8 feet or 16 feet wide. It's a level area. You can set up temporary fencing and let in your goats, or you can let in your chickens, or you can let ducks through here, and they'll tend to take care of those pests. But one thing is interesting though, gardening this way, and sometimes it's called natural farming, or it's like an English natural garden. Gardening like this, if you chop and drop before the grasses go to seed or before the so-called weeds go to seed, you can actually, it won't stay like this forever. It'll actually start growing less and less material. And that's why we trim the vegetative strips quite often. So the vegetative strips will grow up to about knee-high. We chop it with a scythe or a comma. We lay that material around the vegetables that we want. We use it as a mulch. That will grow back again. We'll cut that every week sometimes. But what happens is we're depleting the seed bank in that particular area. So it's real important not to mulch the vegetative strips. We want to keep removing materials from them and moving it just inches away into the designated paths around the designated plants, so that what we end up having is these nice hardy strips with good root mass that give us that mulch. We don't have to bring in straw bales. We don't have to bring in wood chips. We don't have to bring in all the different exterior materials, because God in nature's abundance is growing it right here at our fingertips. Yes, it looks strange. To some, it might even look ugly. But as you see the blaze of color and the activity around and the small birds and all the things that are going on here, you start to understand that this is what nature intended. This is the kind of abundance that feeds itself. Do we worry about fertilizer prices? No. Do we worry about conditions economically worldwide? No. As long as we're saving seed and caring for the soil, we can plant those seeds and have abundance. Now, one day the seed bank in the beds will be gone, because again, we're cutting these plants down before they go to seed. That allows us to let the plants that we want mature and go to seed. So again, there are grasses that are inherent. They come in with the birds and everything. We cut those before they go to seed. But if we have wildflowers, for example, we may let those wildflowers go to seed, drop onto the soil, and then we come back with an abundance of wildflowers. Some of the heritage breed tomatoes, for example, we just drop the rotten tomatoes on the ground, or if the birds knock one over or it gets rained on too much, we just let them go on the ground and they will volunteer and come back next year. We're building a seed bank of the plants that we want by using select, cut, or chop and drop methods. The mulching actually inhibits additional plant growth because we're covering the soil, not allowing the conditions necessary for those seeds to grow. But we're ultimately banking in the soil an abundance that will serve us for years to come. So don't be afraid to let a bed go idle. Don't be afraid to let things get a little bit overgrown. Don't be afraid to chop and drop and layer. And definitely don't be afraid to just sit and relax and enjoy the abundance. I'm going to sit here for a little while longer, enjoy these butterflies, enjoy the shade and the cool breeze, and I hope you will too. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. We help property owners get the most from their property in natural and holistic ways, in ways that develop food security and natural abundance. I'll see you in the next podcast.